In this lecture, we want to talk about how to load a data file. Actually, we'll talk a little bit about how to input and output data files. So many times we want to use MATLAB to do computational things on a data set, but the data set is already available and stored in another format. So we need to take the data in that format, whether it's a text file, an Excel file, or even another MATLAB array, and we need to be able to load it into MATLAB. Also, sometimes when we have data in MATLAB and we've done some calculations on it or created something, then we need to output that. So the next few slides in this lecture are going to talk about inputting and outputting data files in MATLAB. So basically what load does is it reads data on a row by row basis. And each row is separated by an enter, where enter is used instead of the semicolon. Each data value is separated by either one or more blanks or by a comma. The number of columns of data in every row must be the same. For a row vector, data can be entered without using enter. For a column vector, each data value is followed by an enter. So that's how MATLAB is interpreting the load command. So for example, let's suppose that our data are in an ASCII file. So in other words, we just have a text file, and this is what the data look like. So we basically have a couple of columns, and one is numerical, the other is also numerical. And what the previous discussion meant was, what the previous slide meant was, if you were to create this file in Word or in a text file or some kind of comparable ASCII file, basically you know what you would do. You would type a 1 and then you would type tab once or twice, and then you would type .1, and then you would type return or on a non-Mac enter. So that's what the previous discussion was talking about. So let's suppose that this is stored as test1304.txt in the following form. Then basically what the load function will do is you just put load, and then the name of the file is in quotes, and you will notice that you have to include the path. And so this is what's going to be slightly different if you're in Windows compared to OS. How you designate the path in the Mac is a little bit different. So this is basically just pointing MATLAB to the correct path. And then basically what this is doing is this is just saying that everything, all the rows for column 1 will be stored as X, and all the rows for column 2 will be stored as Y. So what colon comma 1 means, it means in an array, colon means take every row because it's in the row position. 1 means first column. So basically if we take every row in the first column and every row in the second column, assign the first set of rows to X and the second set of rows to Y, then we've entered this, and this column is called X and this column is called Y, and then we can then plot X versus Y, and you can see there's some fancy stuff done here, dashed line, red, use the caret symbol to plot, insert a grid. So here's a plot basically of these two commas of numbers where the load function was used to input the numbers. Now when you do save, you can basically use the save command to output. So the syntax on the save command is, the first thing is a string that contains the name of the file to be saved and its directory if it's different from the current directory. The variables are strings that contain the names of the n variables that are to be saved in the order they appear. And then ASCII is a string that tells what format you're going to save the data in. Now we'll say if you just enter save and you enter like an array, like save A, MATLAB is going to have a default, and it's going to default to save it in a .mat file. .mat files are the file format into which data are saved within MATLAB. All right, so here's our previous example. So we've done the same thing. We've loaded this data set. We've loaded the first column in X. We've loaded the second column in Y. And then what we do is we have another variable that we're going to call Y square root, where we actually take the square root of Y. And then we're going to define a matrix called out, which will be our output matrix. The first variable in the matrix will be X, the array X, the first column, and the second will be square root of Y. So we've basically taken our previous XY data and we've changed it to X and square root of Y. And now what we want to do is we want to save that file. So the way to save that file is exactly as we did it before. So we have the path to give the directory where we want to save the file, and then we have the file name, which in this case we're calling test1304 save.txt. We're telling it that it is output, and we want to do it, and that out is the file that we're actually saving. So in other words, first it's the name of the file you want to save to, and then it's the name of the variable or the array out that you want to pull from, and then ASCII is the format you want to save it in. So when you do that, your output file looks like this. All right, so in the next video, we'll show some examples of what happens because there's a little bit of an easier way to do this. If the file that you want to load is in your current folder, then actually you don't have to always give it a path. It depends on the version of MATLAB that you're using and the way you have your file structure set up. But sometimes when you do that, this long string of directory information can be omitted if you've got the current directory as the directory that you want to draw from. So anyway, that is usually what I do. Usually instead of typing a long string like this, because I tend to make typos, I'll get the directory that I want to save to and make it active. And then when I save, I'm actually saving to that directory. You can even create folders, even within the MATLAB environment. If you want to create a new folder within that directory, you can do that, or you can rename folders, or you can do whatever. So that makes it pretty useful. The only exception is if you're saving into the MATLAB format, the .mat format. Sometimes, and once again, it depends on whether you're using a Mac or a PC and how you have your system set up. Sometimes it'll save automatically to a MATLAB file folder. So sometimes when MATLAB installs, it sets up a default folder that when you save, it's going to save to that folder unless you tell it otherwise. Other times it's going to save to whatever your active current folder is here. So it just kind of depends on what your original MATLAB setup is. So my advice is, if you're saving a file, go through this as a little experiment once and ask it to save, and then go in to whether you're on Mac or Windows. If you're on Windows, you'll basically do a search. If you're on the Mac, you'll go to the Finder window and do a search there. But do a search for the file that you just named and see where MATLAB put it. Did it put it in your active folder? Did it put it in some other folder that's your default folder? And so on. So the best way, just syntax-wise, to make that happen is to just play with it until you figure out what it's doing.